Excited to be here. Hey, we're in part 7 of our 8-week series on Daniel called Studies in Daniel. So you guys been enjoying the series so far? It's been pretty good, right? Daniel, what a guy. I want to be like him when I grow up. So big fan. This book really is just based on how to live a godly life in the midst of turbulent, crazy times. Everything's not super smooth, but this guy's still just being faithful, steady, living for the Lord, and it's just an amazing testimony for us, for sure. I was reading 2 Kings. It's been in our reading plan this past week, and in chapter 5, there's just a neat little story at the beginning of the chapter where there's an Israelite girl who's taken captive, so now she's a slave for the Armin ruler of the army, and she's, there a slave, obviously not great circumstances, but her owner is leprous. He's got leprosy now. So, you'd think if you're a slave, you'd be worried about surviving, you'd be worried about maybe how can I escape, but she's over there, she sees her boss, her owner has leprosy, and she tells him, hey, you should go talk to the guy in Israel, he probably could heal you. And, so it's just neat how she's in the middle of not great circumstances, but she's still she's got her eyes up, she's looking around, hey, how can I be a blessing to my enemies even? And it really fits in with the series on Daniel here, just not letting our circumstances determine our outlook on life, our attitude. A lot of times you can tell how people's lives are going just by their attitude. It's like, okay, he's obviously things are going well for this guy because he's got a good attitude, versus someone else who they're sad, okay, life isn't great. But we don't have to let our circumstances define how we act, how our attitude is towards life. And I think that's just a great takeaway. When we put ourselves not at the center of everything, that definitely helps. So I like it. But guys, good news. Today we got some lions. So I know you guys have all been waiting on Daniel in the lion's den. Today is your day. But before we do that, I want to just kind of set the stage on just the historical context of where we're at now on the life of Daniel. Kind of the same with last week. We kind of had a time jump in between chapter 4 and chapter 5. There's another time jump between 5 and 6 here. And Book of Daniel is basically sci-fi. There's a lot of time travel going on. So just if you like those kind of movies, you're going to like Daniel. So wild stuff happening. But now, as opposed to the Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, we're now in the Persian, Medes and Persians type realm here in the area. So also I was looking at like the kings and all that during this Assyrian, Persian times. It was crazy, man. There's a Darius the Great, there's a Cyrus, and there's a Cyrus the Great, just kind of like all mixed around the same time. I'm like, I don't know who was when or who was where, but there's a lot. So if you want to be confused, go try to study that this week. Have fun with that. Let me know how it goes, because I didn't figure it out. So anyways, at this point, Daniel's about 80, so he's definitely a little further along in life now. And he's been through multiple empires, and he's just still there, which is incredible to me. Like, empires coming and going, but Daniel's still there, doing the right things, being steady. And I think it's just kind of like a picture of God's kingdom. Like, things come and go, but God's still there. And I think Daniel's a neat picture of that. So before we get into Daniel in the lion's den, got a little joke to share with us this morning. I was actually wondering if it was going to be the main event. So, yeah, had to say it. So, lions, manes, you guys get it? Someone's still sleeping. It's fine. Okay, so check this out. This is the tale of what actually happened at Pride Rock in The Lion King, okay? So we all know how it goes in the movie when Mufasa tells him, everywhere the light touches is their kingdom. And Simba asks, what about the shadowy place? Now, we've all, heard what happens in the movie, but there's another version that was actually discovered this past week. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Pretty exciting stuff. So in the original version, and Simba responds, okay, so in the original version, you guys got that. But in this one, What is the shadowy place? Mufasa responds, it's the Super Bowl. The Lions don't go there. So, stop. So, any Detroit fans, I'm sorry. I was required to read that. So, anyways, Anthony's dad is actually a huge Lions fan, biggest Lions fan I've ever met. So, sorry, Victor, if you end up seeing this online. Apologies. Anyone who's a Lions fan, they are a true football fan. There's nothing fake about them at all. So, props to you guys. I was painting a townhouse this week with my brother Sam, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be chatting up Daniel in the Lion's Den this Sunday. And so, you know how brothers, you just start like coming up with ideas, having fun, you got to pass the time. So he's like, you know, it'd be hilarious. You're preaching on Daniel in the Lion's Den, some guy walks up with like a full lion like costume outfit and just kind of like stands off to the side. You get a couple like lion roars coming through the speakers, but like the speaker doesn't even acknowledge them. They're just like standing there. So next time we do Daniel Lion's Den, we'll try to make that happen. Amazon wasn't fast enough, so just kidding. Anyways, back to Babylon. Okay, not back to Babylon yet. One more funny story. Daniel and the Lion's Den. Growing up, you guys ever seen the VeggieTales for Daniel and the Lion's Den? Classic. I think it was like one of the first ones. It was way back there. I think I was probably like 10 or something. Anyways, there's a part in Daniel Lion's Den when I think it's the angel starts singing to Daniel, like, don't cry, Dan. You know, you guys know it. I'm terrible at singing, so I'm not actually going to do it. Anyways, whenever one of my siblings, one of us was having a tough time, we'd sing that to that sibling, and we put their name in it, so it'd be like, don't cry, Adla, you know, just, anyways, we were not the greatest siblings in the world, so I figured I'd just share that with you guys and get it out there. You know, just repenting, it's fine. Anyways, back to Babylon now for sure. Okay, so as we walk through, this is kind of like the final story in the book of Daniel. Chapters 7 through 12 are pretty much all like dreams, visions, prophecy type stuff. But chapter 6 is just a great, neat last story of Daniel's life. And there's a lot of practical stuff that we can take away from this story and apply it to our lives. And to really sum it up, you can really ask the question, like, how are we to live? You know, and that's a great question. Most of us probably aren't going to live in places where the president knows Jesus, or your king knows Jesus, or all your authorities know the Lord and walk exactly according to his ways. So I think that's just a great question to ask ourselves, like, how am I supposed to live in the midst of not having the greatest authorities in life? So yeah, let's check out some of these practical nuggets that we're going to find in this chapter. Daniel chapter 6. We got a whole chapter to read today, guys, so get pumped. Bible's a good place to read, so I'm with it. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one of them, to whom these satraps should give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. I just love that line there. An excellent spirit was found on this guy. And man, that's just a great goal to have. Like, do people say that about you? Do you have an excellent spirit about you? Having God in your heart definitely helps you move in that direction. So tip for us for sure. This guy, Daniel, was about to be put in charge of the whole country, which is incredible. Like, just what it says about this guy's character. He'd been an advisor to many kings before this, but this was his first governmental position, which is pretty neat. And this is the 4th king under which Daniel had held just a high place, whether it's kind of advisor type role or interpreter of dream type role. But it's amazing that this is now the 4th king this guy has served under, which is incredible. A lot of times when a king took over an empire, you know, they'd wipe out all the advisors, all the magicians, satraps, all those people, the whole family of the previous ruler. But Daniel's still there, just with each one, which is really neat. He didn't withdraw. He didn't resign. Many of the exiles had already started to return to rebuild back in Jerusalem, but Daniel was still there, and God just had a plan for him to be there, be a witness, be a light, and it was just incredible about just how he stayed faithful, stayed steady, and stayed where God had him. Verse 4, then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. And it's kind of crazy. Whenever you move to the next level, a lot of times your old peers try to pull you back down. They're like, hey, you can't go there without me. So have the right people around you. I think it's a good life lesson. Sometimes we can't pick the people around us, but if you can, pick the right people. Those 4 words, because he was faithful, definitely really stand out in this section of Scripture. I mean, are you a faithful person? Are you steady? Are you doing the best with what is given you? Is just a great goal to have, and just that whole idea of no accusation found against him. It's just like, man, just when you look in the closet of someone's life, like there was nothing there to find that Daniel was doing the wrong thing. We've said it a bunch on this series. Purity establishes your witness, but compromise kills your witness. And we kind of live in a glass house, so to speak, in this day. Like, I mean, everything seems more out in the open. Social media, like internet, like just stuff's out there. And it makes life a little easier if you aren't trying to stuff a whole bunch of stuff in a closet somewhere and just keep it shut, because closets are getting harder to keep hidden in these day and time. And just the theme of the series is living counter to culture. And, culture often says just keep everything under wraps, like don't share, hide stuff. But God's way is like repent, and get things right. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to compromise in some way. But how quick are we to apologize and say our sorry and get right with the Lord and with others? I think is a great goal to have. Almost like to tell on yourself, so to speak, is better than getting found out. I was in college, and I was working a landscaping job back a ways, and there was a guy who kind of ran the crew. It wasn't the boss, but kind of the foreman type dude. Every once in a while, he'd use like the company credit card to buy breakfast while we were gassing up the truck. And so he'd be like, Chris, you want me to get you something? So a few times I was like, yeah, sure, cool, man. Just trying to kind of fit in. And it just kind of kept nagging at me, and just like, man, I stole from my boss. Like, there wasn't really any way other to say it. So it just kind of weighed on my spirit for a while. I think it was about a year later, I was finally like, man, dude, I just gotta get this right. I don't like having this hang over me. So I, got some cash out of the bank and brought it to my boss and apologized. And it was like, I know this is more money than I took. And I didn't tell him about the other guy, but I just said, hey, man, I used the company credit card to buy breakfast a few times. And so I paid him back, and he forgave me. And I felt like he almost trusted me more after I did that. And it just felt so good to just get that right and to apologize for that. And I know I slept really good that night. I was like, whew, got that off my chest, man. It's like a weight right there. But, just the idea of having a clear conscience is way better than having a free breakfast. And, just getting stuff right, it just feels good. So if you got something just kind of nagging in the back of your mind, kind of on your heart, like, man, I need to apologize for that, or I need to get this right, just do it. It's worth it. And it's not always easy, but it's the right thing to do. Verse 6 says, Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, I just mixed prefects and satraps there, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish the ordinance and enforce the injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. And you can tell by the way Darius responds, especially later in the chapter, that they were obviously inferring that Daniel was on board with this rule. And this guy was about to put Daniel in charge of the whole country, basically. So they're like, hey, all of us leaders are on board with this law. You want to go ahead and sign it? And so with them saying that, they're lying to the king. And Daniel is definitely not on board with this. But Daniel's faithful to obey the law. He's a person of good character. But he's always put righteousness ahead of being right, which is an important part of Daniel's life. Being right is just all about, okay, I need to look like I'm right, but righteousness is putting God first and pointing to him. If you pursue righteousness, you'll always be right. If you pursue being right, you most often have to compromise righteousness. So what does Daniel do? Verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had his windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. And these guys knew what Daniel was going to do. This guy was steady, man. He did the same thing over and over. He did the right things over and over again. And I love that little clip there. It says, as he had done previously. It's not like he just started praying right after this law got made. He's like, all right, I'm going to show him I'm righteous. I'm going to pray. Now this is against the rules. He just kept doing what he was doing before, and he kept honoring God. I think it's neat how he didn't close the windows because he had to open them. He had them open before. He didn't go and pray in the palace or something and try to be like, yeah, I'm praying, Darius. I'm doing this. He just kept doing what he was doing. He didn't flaunt his prayers, but he didn't back down either. He stood for what was right. And he did make a petition and plea, but he did it to God and not to man, which is pretty amazing. The challenge is, where's the first place that you take your petition and your plea to? I think that's a great question. Like, what do you do when stuff hits the fan? Do you go and talk to your boss? Do you go and talk to your spouse? Do you go and, talk to your best friend? Like, how about we take stuff to God first? Like, that should be our number one place where we take things when things go crazy. I think God a lot of times is on number 4, number 5 on our list, like, as opposed to being number 1. Like, this guy's about to, he's doing something that could end his life, and he goes straight to God. It's incredible. We go there in prayer before we go there in person. We say that a lot here at Manna. Prayer, it's our secret sauce. Gotta have it. And Daniel went there in prayer before he went there in person, and he went to God before he went anywhere else. And again, I said this message was going to be practical, so we got some takeaways from Daniel's response here. And just thinking about his response to authority is incredible. I mean, this guy wasn't going out of his way. I feel like some people try to look for ways to get out of authority, be like, well, this is against God, so let me, just always trying to make up stuff to get out of. Anyone here love all their authorities? Yeah, probably no one. So we all have them. But, authority is put there by God. And I think, especially in the American culture of being independent, being your own man, the principle of authority gets diminished and overlooked a lot. And it's a principle that God's put there. And I think most of us need to respect our authorities more than we currently do. My dad told us a story when we were young, and it's just kind of always stuck with me. There was a Japanese missionary overseas, and he met this Japanese girl, and the girl was saved, but her parents weren't. And he went and asked if he could marry the girl, and they told him, we're not going to give our blessing on this marriage. And they both really had a heart, we want to honor her parents, even though they don't know the Lord, and they're not following Jesus, so they waited, and they didn't get married. And I think it was about 3 years later, finally, he stuck around, and her parents were like, this guy's a good dude, we're going to bless this marriage, and they ended up getting married. And it's just an incredible story about honoring authorities even though they didn't know the Lord. And I mean, they could have went ahead and got married. But just what great seeds that they're planting for their family. Like their kids down the road, I bet their kids honor them and are obeying them because they've planted those seeds of honoring authorities. And yeah, it's just, as you're a student, like you should be thinking about, hey, if I'm a teacher someday, am I a student that I would want to have? You know, if as an employee, like, man, someday if I'm a boss, am I the kind of employee that I would want to have on my team? You know, as a kid growing up, like I remember thinking, am I the kind of kid that I would want to have someday? And, you know, it's just, we reap what we sow. And authority is definitely one of those areas where there's a lot of reaping and sowing. You see people growing up and their kids are like off the rails. They're like, you remember you when you were a teenager? You planted some bad seeds. So let's plant good seeds, especially in the area of authority. And I know it's easy for people just to be like, well, they don't know the Lord and this boss is trash. Be like, honor that person. God put that boss in your life, and he's fashioning and shaping you through this person who doesn't know the Lord. And really, unless your authority directly contradicts the Lord, you should obey them, like in all things. And that's what Daniel did, and what an amazing example of that. And Daniel, he took a stand, and he is really thinking about it, he actually did obey authority because God was his main authority. So you got God, then Darius, then Daniel. So he kept obeying Darius, but then when Darius contradicted Darius's authority, he obeyed God, his ultimate authority. So he didn't rebel, he obeyed his ultimate authority. And that's just a great question, like, who is our ultimate authority? And it's easy to say God, but really, is God your ultimate authority? I think that's a great question to ask ourselves. It's a hard hat summer, you know. So authority is a tough topic for sure, but it's a good thing. There's something safe about staying under that umbrella of protection, safety about staying under your authorities. That a lot of times people get out and it's like, man, you're not under it. It's a dangerous place to be. Like, stay under that thing, and I'm telling you, there's safety there, and there's something special about just camping out. God put that authority in your life. Respect that person and just obey them. And there's just some neat things that God can do in your life as you honor someone who maybe isn't even honoring God. And there's something to that for sure. And Daniel was willing to suffer for righteousness. He knew what the consequences were for not obeying. He's like, someone might see me, but I'm still going to do what I'm still going to seek God, and I'm not going to pray to some king. I'm going to pray to my heavenly Father. He could have been like, I'm going to take a month off. There was only a 30-day rule. He's like, I could wait a month and I'll pray to God in September instead of August. But nope. He's like, I'm going to keep praying to the true God and respect my ultimate authority. So what happened? Verse 12, then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that whoever makes a petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set in his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that this is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and the sleep fled from him. So again, these guys definitely lied to Daniel, by the way Darius responds to this, like he is distraught. He did not think that this was going to be something that would cause Daniel to have this punishment. And it's amazing, like this part of the story. You got a king who spends all day trying to find out a loophole to get Daniel out of this, and then he won't eat and he can't sleep that night. Like, how often do you think a king spends all day trying to free a slave, and then he doesn't sleep that night, won't eat, won't partake of any entertainment? Like, this is incredible. Like, just shows how good of a friend Daniel was to Darius. Like, he really valued this guy, and like he valued a slave that much that he's going to spend all day, all night, just thinking about it, trying to figure out a way to get him out of this. It's incredible. And with the Medes and Persians, like basically they couldn't overturn a rule because like the king was considered a god, so that was part of the reason that he couldn't get him out of it. So how did this thing finish? Verse 19. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste. This guy's in a rush, man, sprinting over to the lion's den. And he came near to the den where Daniel was, and he cried out in a tone of anguish. And the king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent an angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king, I have done no harm. And I was thinking about this with Riley this week. We were just chatting about the story, and it was like, sure, the mouths of the lions can open, but how about their claws, man? They got some pretty serious claws going on. I mean, these guys are 500-pound killing machines. I'm pretty sure a lion could kill you without biting you, and it's just incredible. Sure, their mouths are shut, but also, I mean, lions are probably just like angels who are like, you just sit in the corner and don't kill them even without your mouths. Also, interesting thought on this was it was probably more like a lion's cage than a den. You know, you see all like the kids' stories and paintings, and it's like all the rocks, and it's like a cave. But definitely the wordage and time in this day, it was probably more like a lion's cage. Lions were used a bunch for sport, for the royalty and whatnot. So a lot of times they'd keep them in a barred cage type feel and use them for sport. Like they'd tie a lion to a tree, and the king would kill it, be like, easy win, can't give the lion a chance. But they were used a lot in that type of way back in those days. And also, you hear the wordage about the stone rolled in, for the den door. But the word stone was used kind of as the word for door during those times. So that's kind of another, language changes over time. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. Speaking of kids' stories, it's funny how in the Bible, you got like David and Goliath, people's heads getting cut off. You got Daniel Lions Den, people getting shredded by lions. You're like, yeah, it's a kid's story. They'll be fine. It's cool. It's no problem. I was like, skip over that part, 5-year-old. Don't worry about it. Verse 23, then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions. They, their children, and their wives, marry the right guy, girls. So pretty crucial. Back to the massacre here. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. All their bones. Man, tough day. Then the king Darius wrote to all their peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And this is just an incredible part of the story here. Like, this is a guy who doesn't know God, and he's literally worshiping God because he knows Daniel. And this happens in chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar as well. These guys who are worshiping some other god, worshiping themselves, but they run into Daniel and they literally worship God because they know him. And I think it's just a great takeaway. Like, people can come to know God and worship him by meeting us, and we can be that in between, that introduction. Like, we're witnesses for God, and people who know us should see God through us and be able to worship him in that way. So I think that's just a great goal to have in life. Like, we can introduce people to God and they can learn how to worship him just by the way we live. And it's pretty incredible. So Daniel is delivered and God gets the glory. This happens over and over again in this book. And it's amazing. Deliverance comes from the hand of God and God receives the glory. That's really what this whole thing's about. And, God delivered Daniel because Daniel was blameless. And, I love the story I think it's in Matthew. It's in one of with Jesus and the adulterous woman, and he finds her, runs into her, and all the guys are getting ready to stone her, and he says, he is blameless, throw the first stone. And then Jesus is like, well, I'm not going to throw one either. And it's just an amazing picture of God's heart for people. And, he doesn't tell us, go do whatever you want. He wants us to become righteous and become like him. But he's just such a God of second chances. He's such a God of restoration. He's such a God of, I love the prodigal son story. Like, he's not the older brother. He's the dad just watching the road, waiting for people to return to him. And we should have that same heart, for people. And we should also pursue righteousness as he calls us to. And I think it's like, in regards to sin, are we kind of like, whoops, or are we like, man, get me the heck out of here, like, help me become more like Jesus and repent and turn. And it's definitely, we're never going to be perfect, but we can become more like Jesus and pursue righteousness. Daniel was blameless before the one who had all the power, and that was God. And he stayed in right standing with his ultimate authority, and he stayed in right standing with his earthly authority as much as he could. Check out Daniel's response again here. Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm." And, it's just, I think a lot of people skip over the earthly authority part and just focus on, I'm good with God. But Daniel also stayed in right standing with his earthly authorities as well until they contradicted. We're called to live blamelessly. We're not going to be perfect, but we can become more like Jesus. And the story isn't about Daniel triumphing over evil, or this wasn't about proving to Darius that Daniel was right, but the story is about worshiping God. That's really what it's all about. It's about Daniel pointing to God, and it's like, I'm here to worship this guy, and I'm going to keep praying to him. I'm going to keep worshiping him, and you guys can do whatever you want with me. And it's just, what a story. Like, Daniel, he's just a great picture of how to navigate through life when the world's doing their own thing. It's like, no, I'm just going to point to God. Like, if we point to ourselves, things get all out of perspective. Things get mixed up. But we just point to God and be like, hey, this is what God says. I'm standing with him. And that's just what Daniel kept doing over and over again. And we don't need to be obnoxious. We don't need to be crazy. We don't need to be out on the street with billboards like turn or burn, like all that stuff. But I'm just gonna keep pointing to him. Like, it's like, people see me, I want them to see Jesus. And that's how we can win people's hearts. And we just keep loving people, keep pointing people to Jesus, and things get better. God exalted Daniel because he could be trusted. He was faithful, steady. He just kept doing the right stuff, kept honoring God, kept pointing to him. Let's pray this morning. Jesus, we're just so grateful for Daniel's example. God, we just pray that we would be a people who just point people to you, who don't point people to ourselves or try to gain attention or glory for ourselves, but that we just be people that worship you, God, and point people to you as Daniel did. And God, help us not to be obnoxious, but also help us to stand for what's right and to know that balance and to focus on righteousness instead of being right. Amen. If you guys could just keep your heads bowed for